You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network. Visit pencilandpaperproductions.podbean.com to find more great podcasts.
Hello and welcome to a currently unnamed podcast. I'm your host, Stephen White. With me is my co-host, Philip Peck.
Hello. How's everyone doing today?
We'll be doing better once we have a proper name for this podcast because we don't have one set in stone. I'd say by the time this comes out, we'll actually have something set in stone. But as of this recording, we have nothing because all the good names are taken. At least that's what I've been told, because everything I've looked up has told me that there's a podcast called Fill in the Blank that I've thought of today.
What were some of the ideas that you had for names? Because I know that all the names that I've thought of, even though they may be taken, they weren't exactly good names. So I'm still hopeful.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get one.
Yeah, we'll get one. I mean, I think the only one that we haven't gotten taken away from us was the one where we were just like, why don't we just call it the Philip and Stephen podcast? But you know what? Something tells me if we search it, it'll be taken. I had one at the middle of the night. Like I was sitting there trying to go to sleep. And of course my brain is going 100%. And I don't know why this is the name that came into my head, but it was like Cinema Sauce. And I was like, Cinema Sauce. That's good. Oh yeah, that's good.
That is good.
And then
that has to be taken.
It is taken. Because as I sat there and thought about it, I thought, I need to look this up right now. I don't care how late it is. I need to look it up just to be sure. Otherwise, I'm going to be marinating on it all night. That's not a pun.
What about Cinema Salsa?
Salsa? See? Yeah, we could change it up. We're not sauce. We're salsa. I don't know. You'd have to look that up. Cinema Salsa. But then are we going to give off the right vibes? I mean, I think we could. That just means we're more fun. Sauce is, just something you kind of put on there.
People might not know what they're getting, but when they show up here, they might be pleasantly surprised at what they find.
That's true. Okay. I think, you know what? We might actually have to take that. Because
grab it.
There is no Cinema Salsa. We could be Cinema Salsa. So I
do like salsa, and pretty much everything that's Mexican related is okay in my book. So.
Oh, yeah. So we'll put a pin in that. It's not taken. Cinema Salsa.
So we just needed to collaborate.
That's right.
Instead of trying to come up with ideas on our own and bouncing them off each other, we just...
Because my brain didn't go to salsa. I don't know why. It was just like sauce. Because that's where you normally go. But salsa is when you're kind of in that mood. Cinema Salsa. If it's not called Cinema Salsa at this point in time, when you people are listening to this, then we brainstorm to a better space.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's definitely some other possibilities out there that might be more fitting, but you never know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I had a few, because I was looking through, and I think this is what a lot of people did. The more I started looking into it, I was like, you know what? Everyone else is doing this. I got to start thinking farther outside the box, because I think a lot of people went and started looking at film jargon, and they were just like, ooh, I'm going to name it the MacGuffin, or the last cut, or break a leg, or whatever you can come up with in normal film jargon. Someone has made a title.
Speaking of jargon, that reminds me of one. I think, and this I might be getting the wrong terminology, but I think there's something called the martini shot. Have you heard of that before?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What about that one? Is that one taken?
I think it was, because that one also sounded really good, and I was like, oh man,
damn it.
But hang on, let me look.
Maybe, that one's, well, I mean, I guess obscure isn't a bad thing.
No.
But it might be a little obscure, and like people might not know what it's referring to, or that it's even about film or cinema in any way.
Well, it's taken, so damn.
Well, maybe we should just do a podcast about something different.
Okay. Because everyone else is doing this. No, actually, if you want to talk about that, we're actually looking to try and approach a film podcast, because I'm a film buff. And not a lot of people might not know that about me, because if anyone knows me in the podcast space, it's from a podcast called Super Mega Crash Brothers Turbo. We talk about video games. Now, I like video games. I have nothing wrong with video games. I love playing video games all day. But if you were to ask me what my passion is, that wouldn't be at the top of the list. It would be film. Film is what I love. It's what I grew up loving. And I guess when it came to doing a film podcast, I noticed that a lot of people were doing the same things, because they'll pick a movie and they'll talk about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I don't want to do that when everybody else is doing that. And that was kind of the same idea I had when it came to doing Super Mega Crash Brothers Turbo is, okay, well, if we're doing a video game podcast, what are we doing that nobody else is doing? And I feel like we found our footing at some point. So we're not, I feel like we're unique enough where we might have elements that other people do. But with this, that's kind of the approach I wanted to as well. I don't want to do what, just pick a movie and we'll talk about it. Not to say that we won't talk about movies, but I don't think we're going to talk about them in the, oh man, did you see that movie? Oh man, did you see what happened? Oh, you remember that scene? It's not going to be like that. We're going to get into the meat, because that's the good stuff. At least I think so. I'm always fascinated with documentaries and things like that. That's where I get, especially if it's a movie I love. Mm-hmm. I cannot wait to watch a movie or a documentary based on a movie that I truly have a passion for, just to find any little thing that I don't know.
So you're more about, well, of course the movies are the important part, the actual stories, the movies themselves, but also just like everything that went into the making of the movie, the people that made it,
right,
the history of it, the context behind it, all those kinds of things. And that's, I think, what you and I agreed on, that we'll be trying to focus more and more in this podcast, not just, individual movies and talking about them, but also the behind the scenes stuff, industry stuff, the people who make the movies, and, particular pieces of history and context where they all fit together.
Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of people are going to, in this day and age, there's a lot of film history from way back when that is starting to be lost. And I think it's important to remember a lot of that film history. I think it's important for context where we are, because even when film history is kind of brought up now, I honestly feel like it's more in the, well, you can't do that today mentality. But there's so much more than just that. It's not just about, well, you can't do that today. And I think that gets skewed, if you know what I'm kind of talking about as far as that terminology goes.
What's allowable, what's acceptable,
right,
in terms of the culture, in terms of, different populations.
Yeah. I think a lot of those older movies get stigmatized from people, like, I guess I'm trying to figure out a proper way to categorize the younger generation. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's hard for me to fathom sometimes when I think about the movies I grew up with, and I meet someone who's half my age and they have no idea what movie I'm talking about. Like, they have never in their lifetime seen this movie, and in my head I'm dumbfounded. I'm like, how have you not seen this movie? It's one of the greatest movies ever made. And it's like, yeah, but they didn't grow up on that. You did.
Yeah.
And perhaps even in my own purview, I'm not seeing some of the problems that movie may have, that if they were to watch it today, they're like, oh, you can't do that today. And I was like, oh, okay. But I didn't think about it because I'm so used to it.
Yeah.
I've actually had that conversation where I've had to re-examine a scene or two in a movie, and I'm like, yeah, I guess that's not very good, is it?
I think the comedian Patton Oswalt had a really good bit, and I'll be butchering it if I really try to go into detail, but essentially he's talking about this, where you can't always look back in not only just movies, but really anything in the past through the lens of today, with what we know today, with cultural attitudes, with attitudes around race and gender and sexuality and politics, whatever the case is. Like, we are different today than we were 30 years ago, 50, 100 years ago. So the culture, morality, we tend to try to reduce things down to the simplest terminology and maybe make things more black and white than they really can be. Mm-hmm. Well, that I would prefer that they be. And even though today is like, there's so many more points of view today that are heard, maybe not always listened to, but even so, there's still a tendency to not give not put things in the proper context and just say that just because it was old and just because the attitudes were different, that it's not worthwhile anymore, or that it's just bad, or that's kind of, those are the kinds of things that we'll be talking about in this show. Not just, hey, did you see this movie and what did you think about it? So
yeah, exactly. And tell everybody, I guess, kind of your background as to what kind of brought you into this, why you wanted to do this, because...
Well, I mean, I love video games, and I wish we could have done a video game I'm just kidding. I do. No, but I do love video games too, but same thing as you. I did grow up loving movies, and it took me a long time before I realized, hey, my first degree as an undergrad was in art. I thought I wanted to make comic books. I mean, I was into movies, into video games, into comic books as a kid. So I've always been into those kinds of cultural artifacts or products, I guess. And so that's where I went at first. And then I actually was in the Army for 6 years, and I got the GI Bill. So when I was coming out of that, I always wanted to go to grad school for something, and I just could never really afford it. So I did have the opportunity to go to grad school. So I was like, I tried to be an artist, a solo artist, but let me do film, because I want to get back into the arts. I want to get back into something artsy, but now I kind of like working with other people. This whole collaborative aspect of it became something that really appealed to me. So I haven't really been into filmmaking myself for that long, probably the last 4 or 5 years, but now I do mostly video production. I wish I could do filmmaking maybe one day. I guess that's my long-term goal.
Right.
Well, this is the rambling answer. So yeah, I've been wanting to make a podcast, and you and I worked on some little projects here and there over the past couple of years, and I know you were into podcasting, so I just reached out to you and thought, hey, do you want to do this? And here we are.
Yeah. I usually complain that I'm a busy man, but if I feel that a great idea is right there, I'm always willing to try it out, and I'll continue to complain that I'm busy, but I'll still do it.
And I also, we're going to talk about a little bit later some of our formative movies, and that was kind of an idea that I had, because I think I was always a super critical person from maybe sophomore year high school on. I was always the kind of person who was like making fun of other people's tastes, making fun of their favorite bands, making fun of their favorite movies. I was just a jerk, but I also... I guess I could have been a film critic or an art critic. I like writing about things. I like, criticizing, not in a mean way anymore. I think I've mellowed out a little bit, hopefully, but.
I mean, I think it's good to be critical, but I do understand your point. I don't really know when it came about, but there was a moment in time where I got tired of the critique. People bashing these movies left and right, because I think some of them were even some that I kind of liked. Even if they weren't the greatest movies in the world, I could find some joy in it for whatever reason. And then I just could not wrap my head around the hate. And I was like, why are people hating on this movie? I can't understand it. Why can't you just let someone enjoy what they like?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I won't be critical, but I think I like to try and find the positives in every movie before I'll tear it apart. There are some garbage movies out there, don't get me wrong. I try to find something good before I go and rip into it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different criticisms, a lot of different styles of criticism, and some people get off on being the savage critic and just being the person who wants to just rip everything apart, and that satisfies their own sense of inferiority or maybe their own ego, whatever it is. But there's also, I mean, my style would be to be more constructive.
Sure.
Because there's always, not that I could tell, say, Steven Spielberg how to make a better movie, but even still, Steven Spielberg, there are elements of any movie that he's ever made that could have been better. When I was in art school, that was always something that was really difficult. People always wanted to, because we would produce something, we would have a project, and we'd all sit around and just talk about each other's projects. And some people would just get so defensive, like it was a personal attack. And I guess, that's understandable, but you have to try to separate the personal from the work, even though you were the person who made it and so much of yourself went into it. That's a difficult thing, but I do like criticism. I read music criticism, movie criticism, video games criticism, and of course there's a spectrum. Just like there's a range of good and bad movies, there's a range of good and bad criticism. So
No, I can relate. When I first started doing short films way back in 2004, I kind of had that heart on my sleeve. If I got one critique, and I knew. I mean, I can go back now and tell you point blank. I know it's not great. I was trying. I was trying to find what I wanted to do, find my voice, whatever it was. I was just throwing stuff at the wall, and whatever could work would work. And I know it's not good now, but there was someone, a random stranger, like the internet does. Someone comes up and just tears your stuff to shreds, and you do feel like it's personal, and you're just like, what did I do wrong? And it's like, you did nothing wrong. And I had to learn how to put that barrier up and be like, don't take it personal. Just
it's the work. They're just talking about the work, and it's hard to separate that. And of course, you're putting it out there, and it's like you're super vulnerable anytime you put something out for other people to watch or look at. That's a very vulnerable place to be in, and of course, no, you don't want to hear that people didn't like it.
Oh yeah.
So,
there was even times that I would. I mean, this is much later on, that I would put something out and show it to someone, and I felt like I was getting a lot of positivity. And as weird as this is, I'm sure that's what everyone wants, but I was just like, okay, but critique me. What's wrong with it? And I'd always feel like no one was being critical of it, and I was like, don't suck up to me because you think that's what I want to hear. Be honest,
Yeah, that's why you can't have your friends and family critique your work. They're not going to tell you what they really think. And especially as a student or as somebody who's just getting started, there's no way your work's going to be any good unless you're just a freaking genius.
Yeah.
And so few of us are. That you have to be willing to accept criticism in order to get better, in order to learn what it is that you did wrong. But anyway, we'll be talking about people who are way beyond the beginning stages and classic movies.
What are you looking forward to now? Like, what's been on your radar?
Well, I have been really bad about keeping up with what is coming out, and I was thinking about this, and the reason why is I think that with the pandemic this past year and not being able to go to the movies, I would hear about a new movie or maybe a new show coming out, and then I would just forget about it because I knew that I wouldn't be able to see it unless it just popped up on whatever streaming services I happen to subscribe to. Yeah, I don't even know. Like, it used to be where I would listen to like NPR in the car, and then they would be talking about a movie, and then I'd come home and tell my wife, like, oh, this new movie's coming out in a few weeks, we got to go see it. But that has not been possible for the most part in the last year.
Right.
So it's like, by chance it happens to be on Amazon Prime or Netflix or HBO Max or something, then I can look forward to it. But most of the times there'll be those random movies that you actually have to like rent or something. One of the Oscar contenders was called Minari.
Yeah.
And I was like asking my wife, do you want to watch that? And we pulled it up, and it was like $20 to rent. And I'm not at the place yet where I'm going to pay $20 to rent a movie to watch at home.
Yeah.
Even though it seems like when you consider the price of a ticket for two people, it's like actually not a terrible deal, but
yeah,
I'm just not there yet. I just won't do it. So I'm going to wait for it to come, when it actually will be more reasonably priced for watching at home. Because I don't know. I feel like I still want to get back into the theaters and watch new movies.
Absolutely.
It's not the same. I feel like every time I watch a movie at home, I can never sit down and watch an entire movie from start to finish. It's more like watch it for a little bit, pause, go do something else, maybe pick it up that same night or maybe pick it up another day or another week. I do have one thing that I'm looking forward to, and it just came out today on Amazon Prime. It's called The Underground Railroad.
Okay, I have heard about that.
It's a TV series, or it's a limited series. It's from the director of Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk, Barry Jenkins, and it's based on a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Underground Railroad. So that is one thing that I'm looking forward to watching. So,
all right. Yeah, I definitely. I'm almost positive I've heard. I don't think I've seen anything about it advertised, but I know I've seen it. It's out there.
Yeah, and again, I just heard about it on NPR like 2 or 3 days ago. I had no idea prior to that it was even coming out or anything about it. But I love Moonlight, and I also really liked If Beale Street Could Talk. I saw both of those in the theaters, and so I feel anything this guy does, I'll be down for.
Sure. So is there anything that you've actually watched here recently that you were actually excited to see, like you kind of really got you pumped? Maybe even to the point where you were like, damn, I wish I could have seen this in the theater.
I think the only new movies that I've seen, the only ones that have come out in the past year that would have had a theatrical release if they didn't, are Tenet, Mortal Kombat, and Sound of Metal. Oh, Judas and the Black Messiah. Okay, so I've seen a pretty decent number of movies in the past week to month, or I guess in the last week to the last month, that would be pretty decently large theatrical movies. I think the only one that I would have liked to have seen in the theaters was probably Judas and the Black Messiah. And maybe Tenet, because I feel like I might have had maybe have stood a better chance of actually understanding the dialogue if I'd seen it in the theaters. But I also did hear that even the people that went to see it in the theaters couldn't hear the dialogue. So
I heard subtitles might help.
yeah, definitely. If you want to watch that movie, turn the subtitles on for sure.
Okay.
There was this one scene in there, and sorry, I'm not going to get ultra critical. It was one of the first scenes between the protagonist and I cannot remember the character's name, but the wife of the main villain, and they're having this long conversation, and it's about her son, and I swear it could have been in a made-up language. It was so I was laughing out loud because I was sitting there listening to it and watching it, and I was like, I have no idea what they're saying. It was so ridiculous. It could have been like Peanuts character where like the teacher stands up in the front of the room and is like what, like it was indecipherable.
Wow. Okay.
So
I'm gonna
anyway,
have to check this out.
have you not watched Tenet yet?
Not yet. It's on my radar since it's on HBO Max now. It's just like I'll get to it. It. But I've also heard these critiques, and I'm just like, I'm not rushing to get to it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, he's really hit or miss for me, but I feel like he benefits from being part of an established, like the Batman movies. I feel like it had to be more straightforward to be part of that IP. Whereas when he gets to make his own movies, and I appreciate the fact that he gets to make these crazy movies because they always have these just very elaborate plots, and they're always built around like a visual gimmick, which is cool because he's like taking advantage. He's one of the few major big budget directors who really does take advantage of what the possibilities of film as a visual medium. So give him all the credit in the world for that, but he needs to, for whatever reason, the sound mixing is really awful. And I did start watching last night another movie that I was sort of looking forward to that just popped up on Amazon Prime all of a sudden called Saint Maud. It's more like a horror, psychological body horror kind of movie.
Okay.
And it was pretty interesting. I got about halfway through it last night before I had to go to bed. But
all right.
So I'm all over the map. A little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
But what are you looking forward to? Is there anything on the radar that?
I really wanted to see the Spiral movie that came out, which is the Saw adjacent movie that came out with Chris Rock. It had such a great idea, a premise, and whether if you like the Saw movies or not, just the way it kind of came off, like it was a procedural detective drama with underlying Saw elements to it, and I was like, this is kind of. Because you're doing
Is this a movie that's already been released?
It just came out today, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. Because I heard you talking about this on your other podcast, and I was like, Chris Rock saw a movie? What is he talking about?
Yeah.
just that is like intriguing enough.
Yeah. So it just sounds like a great movie, and then of course there's mixed reviews out there, and I'm trying to lean toward the ones that I listen to more, but I do understand the what they've been trying to say without really spoiling anything. It's like the best description they laid out for it is the movie is kind of like Law and Order meets Saw. That sounds interesting, I guess. But then they said, but what if though? What if it was more like True Detective meets Saw? And I was like, oh shit, that does sound better. So it's like they just didn't take that extra step and go that deeper route, Like
the movie didn't, or the critics didn't?
Like the movie should have done this one, but
so the movie really
chose,
is Law and Order and Saw as opposed to True Detective and Saw.
Kind of, yeah.
Wow.
And that's where they were just like, why would you go with this one when you got this over here? And this is the better one. So but again, they said it's still kind of fun if you're into the Saw movies and stuff like that. So why not? And I'll probably check it out. Just I'm not rushing out to theaters to go see it.
Yeah.
So it'll be one of those I'll catch when it swings back around. I do want to talk about this one movie that I did watch last week.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't even know what to say about it. It was just the most bizarre movie, but I was so intrigued. And that's just the weirdest thing. Usually if a movie goes way out there, like, for example, have you ever seen Tetsuo the Iron Man?
Nope.
Okay. That movie lost me halfway. Well, not even halfway. I was gone. It's only an hour long or a little over an hour long. I don't even know what happened. I was so confused. It was just bizarre. It came out somewhere in the 90s. I think it's Japanese. And there's apparently a plot that goes on, but I didn't quite see these events happen where this guy apparently killed a guy who put metal into his body, and then now he's possessing the guy who killed him and making him do this. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. I'm just going to say that. Check it out if you want or don't. I'm not going to judge you if you don't. Anyway, this movie, you'd kind of feel like you're going to get that same vibe, but it's so much better in so many other ways. It's called Fried Berry. Have you ever heard of it?
Nope.
Okay.
Fried Berry.
Fried Berry. In a nutshell, Barry is a heroin addict. Barry gets abducted by aliens. And when Barry comes back, he is essentially the vessel for an alien being who then wanders the streets of Cape Town, South Africa, and kind of the dingiest, worst parts of town. But for whatever reason, I'm intrigued the entire time. You watch him, you're just invested in the whole thing, wanting to see where this goes. A lot of weird shit happens, but you're intrigued. The music keeps you engaged. And even at the end, I would even say it takes an E.T. turn, which is weird to say, but it happens. It works. And I was blown away. I was just like, I can't believe I'm really enjoying this movie. And I would probably even say that if I was to recommend it to you, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as good as I could say, because I think there's no middle ground here. You're either in or you're out. So
this seems like a really, I'm looking at like the poster on IMDb.
Yeah.
The poster is amazing, first of all, so there's a lot to recommend it just based on the poster design itself.
Yeah.
So somebody believed in it, the graphic designer, and so that's always a positive sign.
I mean, it seemed to get a few indie awards, film festival awards and stuff like that, so it's been around.
I noticed that it's only available, it's available on one of the sub-channels that you can subscribe to on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, Shudder. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I briefly had a Shudder subscription because there was a film that I wanted to watch called, where did it go? It's Spanish, so I don't want to butcher it. It's called La Llorona. And
I've heard of that.
Have you seen, or you've heard of that one?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's actually there's multiple movies with the title something Llorona, which means it's like a Latin American folk tradition of like a woman who was drowned who comes back and haunts people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's multiple movies that have something about that in their title.
Huh.
But this one came out in 2019. But I think it wasn't released in the United States until maybe a little bit later. But I did subscribe to Shudder for a few weeks just so I could watch that movie. But I was like, man, there's so many interesting horror movies that I would never be exposed to without this subscription.
Yeah. The best way, this is one of the reasons that I actually subscribed to Shudder, because I kind of dabbled with it at first.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also one of the reasons that I really dove into Fried Berry, because I know that I would probably have checked it out at some point, but the reason I have seen it so soon was because of this one show on Shudder called The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. And it is like my all-time favorite thing. Like, as soon as we're done recording, 8 o'clock tonight, I'm there. I'm going to go there. They air it live. Mm-hmm. They do 2 movies. And if you're into horror movies, I mean, obviously that's kind of why you're there, but it reminds me of the old horror hosts like Elvira or Zachary or,
Crypt Keeper.
Yeah, where they just come in and they introduce what you're going to watch.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the times sometimes it could be something you've seen, maybe it's something you haven't. And that's the beauty of it, especially if it's something you haven't, because last week, that was a double feature that I was kind of really excited for, because not only did I get Fried Berry, which I had seen a trailer for, and I was like, I'm intrigued. But I just kind of left it there, and that was about it. But before that was a movie called Ginger Snaps, which is about werewolves. And I'd heard of that, and it's always been on my radar, but I never watched it. And they were like, hey, we're going to watch Ginger Snaps. I'm like, you know what? I'm in. Let's do it. Let's go for it. And they never tell you what they're going to watch. That's the other beauty part. So you just have to kind of be there and wait to see what the shows are going to be. And then you're there for 4 or 5 hours from 8 o'clock till after midnight watching movies. And they interrupt every 30 minutes or something like that, just talking about, trivia and whatnot. Like I think 2 weeks ago they did Bride of Reanimator. And they talked to Jeffrey Combs, which was kind of nice because I can't remember the last thing I've ever seen him in, but kind of getting some of that behind-the-scenes stuff and talking about the movie, it was just great.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept, like sort of like a anthology-hosted sort of thing where, I had no idea. But I'm looking at it now, like when I pulled up Fried Berry and searched for the director, like the first thing that came up was Last Drive-In with, I couldn't read the font because it was too small, but I see.
Yeah, Ryan Kruger, he's the director of that, and I was kind of surprised because I had never done this, mind you, but when they do the live viewings, the people who watch The Last Drive-In, they're like tweeting all the time, like, oh gosh, did you see that? Oh God, doing their commentaries on Twitter. So I thought I'd chime in. Why not? What the hell? I've never done this before. See if I can get anything. The director loved my tweets and stuff, and even after he didn't follow me, mind you, but keep this in mind. A friend of mine was saying, hey, recommend me a new horror movie, and I'm like, Fried Berry. And dude liked it. I didn't hashtag anything, and I'm like, dude, are you stalking me, man? But I just said, hey, I was like, he knows what camp I'm in. You're gonna love it or you're gonna hate it, but I like it. And he's thumbs up it, and I was blown away by it. I was like, dude, this guy really loves his movie, which is fine, but it was just weird, but cool at the same time.
I'm going to do another temporary subscription to Shudder just so I can make sure to watch Fried Berry when we're done here. So
I recommend it. And if you can watch it on the last drive-in, do that as well.
I like any kind of movie. I do have horror movies I do enjoy a good horror movie, but I have to be either in the mood or I have to be with people. I can't. I'm not always there for horror movies, or especially like really gory movies. That's kind of where I would. It's not that I have any moral problem with them or anything that, but it's just like for my own personal taste or comfort or, sometimes I can't go there. But
no, I understand. I mean, I've got a line in the sand when it comes to certain amounts of gore. Like at some point, I'm like, all right, now you've taken it a step too far. Even in the Saw movies, I was sitting there talking about those, like you heard.
Yeah.
There is a line at some point where you're like, all right, you're pushing it, man. You're going just a little too far. And for me, I'm intrigued in the story, but when you start pushing that gore, just that extra step, I'm like, God, if you just pull it back, man, I'm here for it, but just pull it back. Yeah. So I wouldn't say Fried Berry is extremely gory. There are some moments where you're like, oh, okay, but nothing that's going to make you, nothing Saw or even Human Centipede far. Let's say that. I think those are some really extremes that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I'd consider it a horror movie because it's bizarre. If you watch Pink Flamingo or even The Greasy Strangler, you're fine. We're talking about some wild stuff, but it's good. I recommend it. Hopefully you'll find some joy in it as well.
I'll definitely give it a shot. You've definitely got my interest piqued. Again, something I never even wouldn't have been on my radar. So I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about movies that kind of, shaped who we are as film lovers. Am I correct in saying that? Would that be the right way of looking at it? So
That's pretty much the idea, yeah.
the movies that we kind of remember that maybe changed our perspective on something, or maybe formed our tastes, if you will, and maybe even made us a little bit pretentious here and there.
Definitely. It's in my case, that's what it's all about.
So I guess I do want to ask, first of all, what was the first movie you can remember ever seeing in theaters?
I remember seeing The Empire Strikes Back, but I don't know that I'm actually old enough to remember seeing that in the theaters. So I could be, maybe it was, I don't know if it's a real memory.
Right.
I remember seeing a Star Wars movie because I particularly remember seeing Darth Vader do the Force choke on one of the Imperial people. But it's very possible that I saw it later on TV and just projected it onto a projector in my mind.
Sure.
So, but I do know that well, you know what? I don't even know. I think I saw E.T. in the theaters, but again, those were like on the cusp of me being conscious,
Right.
old enough to actually have been there in the theater. So
The first one I can remember, for a fact, I know that I at least saw this one, and the only reason I can even remember that is because, and it's a vague memory at that, but there was a theater in a town adjacent to where I grew up, and the theater's not there anymore, but it was just like this small 2-screen theater, and they were showing Gremlins.
oh yeah,
And I have vague recollections of sitting in that theater and seeing just snippets, but I don't remember the entire experience, but I know I was there.
I know for sure that I saw Gremlins 2 in the theaters, but
That's all I can remember. And I would have been about, when that come out, 84?
I'm not sure, but yeah, somewhere around that time frame.
So probably about 4 or 5 in there. So I know I saw it there, but beyond that, I couldn't tell you. And even I was trying to think of, okay, well, that couldn't have been the only movie I've seen up until this point in theaters. So what was the next movie I couldn't remember.
I hadn't thought about this until you asked me, but I know I've seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the theaters, and I know I saw Big with Tom Hanks. Those were probably late 80s, 87, 88. And I think the first big movie that I remember just dying to go see was Batman.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I was 9. I was 9 when I went and saw that. And I actually, the scene where the Joker is newly the Joker, and he's back from the grave, and he's meeting with all the big crime bosses or whatever. They're sitting around this big conference table, and some guy like kind of makes fun of him, like, "What's with that stupid grin?" And he shocks him to death with the buzzer. I had to leave the theater. I had to walk out and go in the hallway because I was scared. I was such a big baby. But I did come back and watch the rest of the movie. But yeah, that was. I know I saw that one, and I knew I was like super excited for that, and I was so into Batman because I was into comics, and I mean, the whole thing. We had like all the toys, the Batmobile.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was huge.
Oh, yeah, you jogged my memory. That was one I'd forgotten, but I do remember seeing that one in theaters. So, I'm glad that one kind of came back. Would you say that any of those defined anything for you, or maybe?
So when I was thinking about this formative thing, I'm ignoring childhood and early adolescence because those clearly form who you are. But I feel like they form you on a more unconscious or subconscious level. That whole 80s period, but it's like movies and TV. And my sister and I used to wake up early on Saturday mornings and watch USA Network because they just aired cartoons all morning long until about noon. All these crazy cartoons that are lost to memory. But yes, all of those movies form you, but I drew the line in thinking about formative movies when you start becoming more consciously critical and making your own choices and choosing the movies that you think are going to tell you something about who you want to be or who you are.
Right.
So for me, there was like kind of this period of high school, probably sophomore, junior, senior year, and then going on into college, and then early 20s, where I feel like you're still building yourself, building your persona. so to speak. So that's kind of what I was thinking about when I talked to you about your formative movies. So
Right. There were movies I was trying to think of, especially when I was younger to a teenager. And actually, as you were sitting there talking to maybe remember others that kind of came about. Like, obviously, I think with you and I kind of being on similar levels of what our interests are, we had, like a lot of kids of the 80s, Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Gremlins, these things that were just there and they were prevalent, they were original, they were new, and they took hold. Mm-hmm. And that just was something that was there and we just kind of gravitated towards because it was the cool thing. And even, I'll defend them. They're all great. But then I wanted to kind of dabble in other things. And I had a friend, and I honestly feel like he was the influence that did it. Because I had a friend who was, like, he was into horror movies, like he was like, oh, this is the cool stuff right here. And I'm like, okay, cool. And the first horror movie that I remember watching, if you want to call it that, which I feel like we can twist the definition of this because it goes far beyond that, would be Jaws. And the only reason I wanted to watch it was because I saw Jaws 2 advertised on television. And I was like, well, I've got to watch the first one first. So we went out and we rented Jaws.
Won't make any sense if I don't watch the first one.
Right. That's how my brain worked. And this was like Laserdisc. Do you remember? I don't even think it was Laserdisc. It was, I don't even remember what they're called, but it wasn't like
DVDs.
They were discs, but you'd put them in a machine and then you'd spit it back. I don't even remember what it's called. I've looked them up before. I can't remember what it's called, but it was an old device. It doesn't exist anymore. It was like one of those, hey, we're trying to do something different that's not necessarily VHS. Yeah. But it's not popular enough, or maybe it's too expensive and it just didn't work. I don't know. I don't remember what it was. But I remember watching it there, and I got through the entire movie. But once Quint got bit, I was to the bathroom. It hit me the wrong way. I was like, nope, can't do it. And I was, ugh. So it hit me wrong. But after that moment passed, I was ready for it, and I got through it. Then he pushed my buttons again, and it was like, Nightmare on Elm Street. Gonna do Nightmare on Elm Street. I was like, oh yeah, Freddy. Yeah, I like Freddy. Cool, yeah. And I was like, I gotta go watch a Freddy movie. So you go out and you rent a Freddy movie. I didn't even get past Tina dying. And that was like, oh, I can't do this. Because it was too much for my adolescent brain.
I was way too much of a baby to watch any Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I did watch Jaws. Well, I don't know if I watched all of Jaws when I was that age. I remember when that desiccated head kind of floated up into the screen early in the movie. That's probably the last thing that I saw, and then I left and had nightmares about that for the rest of my childhood. Even like Michael Jackson's Thriller was too much for me at that age, so I was a total baby.
No, I remember. Yes, I had that same thing too. About the zombies and everything. You're just like
I just had a way overactive imagination, and I was very sensitive to monsters and just it was tough.
No, don't feel bad. I agree. But it's funny looking back on that now, especially with a movie like Jaws, because I look at it completely different now. Like, it's not a movie I'm terrified of. It's a movie I'm fascinated by and I love so much because there's so much good in there. And I don't even know if I would say that Jaws would have been one of those that I would say was formative at the time.
Yeah.
But it has become formative over time.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong way to think about this. This is just a topic. Take it how you want.
Yeah, because it's one of those that I've definitely done my deep dive homework on. Like, the very first time I watched, there was a documentary, I think, came out on the DVD. I watched it from beginning to end, and I probably watched it several times because I was just so fascinated by the stories, everything that it took to make this movie. And then you think about, like, you have different perspectives on how the movie is approached. Like, the shark wouldn't work, so they had to substitute the barrels. And it was something that, for whatever reason, maybe I hadn't quite thought about. At the time. It's like, that's why they're not showing the shark, is because it didn't work. It was just like, well, no, because we're on the surface of the water, and that's what makes sense. We're not going to go down there. we're not going to put the camera down there. We have to be up here. This is where the humans are.
Right.
But it all works. Like all these little things that they had to sacrifice make for a better movie. And then in turn, that makes me think, okay, well, what am I doing wrong? Or am I doing anything wrong? Or am I looking at something maybe the wrong way? Because look what they did in a pinch to make a better movie. And would it have been a better movie showing the shark more? I don't know. Something tells me no.
Well,
but
no,
we don't know.
I mean, I would say that the answer definitively is no, based on how much that movie is revered by holding back, by not showing you the shark for the longest time. And then even when it does appear, it's so limited. It's really when Quinn gets eaten that's the big moment. And then, that's so interesting because you think of movies are so deliberate. Everything in a movie is there by conscious choice, by conscious decision. Very little is left to chance. Well, of course, depending on budget, but movies of any budget, it's all designed from the cameras to the props to the costumes to the art department, all that stuff. It's there for a reason. Very little is left to chance. But you have this movie that was a huge production, but was just beset by problems and logistical problems and mechanical problems. And, how close was Steven Spielberg from getting yanked off that movie just because he wasn't getting it done and it was running over time and over budget. But all of those things make the movie. Without those problems, like you said, if you had shown the shark more, it wouldn't have been as effective as it is. Yeah. And absolutely. That reminds me, and not to take it totally off topic, but another movie that I watched recently in the last couple of weeks is The Limey, kind of an underappreciated or not a huge hit from Steven Soderbergh, right after he had done Out of Sight. But apparently that was a movie that didn't, all the stuff that they shot and like their first cut, it just wasn't working. So all of these interesting editing, the movie, the way these editing decisions, and they're not, they're pretty in your face. You notice them, but they work. And it's interesting because you don't see, not many movies are edited that way. There's jump cuts all the time, and there's like all these, things are overlapping where you're seeing something that's happening currently, but the dialogue you're hearing is happening a minute or two before that. All these interesting time things, but it was all a result of the fact that it just wasn't working the way they shot it. So they had to make the movie work in the edit, and it works. And it's like such an interesting movie because of that. So it's like a lot of these really great classic. I mean, maybe The Limey's not a classic movie, but some of the some interesting movies happen. And of course, every movie has compromises. Nothing ever comes off without a hitch. But that's a great one. Like Jaws is just Jaws. If you would watch Jaws 2, you probably would not have wanted to go back and watch Jaws,
right?
Because it's just so much better,
Yeah,
so much better.
It's. I don't think there was ever a case to be made that it would ever be better than that. Yeah. Because even I'm fascinated with the idea of shark movies. Yeah. But there's not another good one out there.
I mean, Deep Blue Sea is just a little bit under Jaws, but it doesn't quite. I'm just kidding. It's not anywhere near Jaws. But.
I mean, I love Jaws 2 for just being a horror-esque movie.
Yeah, it's not bad by any means, but it's not Jaws.
But it's not Jaws. Yeah, exactly. And then when you start going down 3 and 4,
I think maybe having all those difficulties maybe elevated it beyond what it would have been if it had gone to plan.
That's true.
Sometimes those things make a better movie, make it more interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it is, especially if you look into what it took. What was even more fascinating is I have probably purchased or double dipped, triple dipped, quadruple dipped for this movie so many times. The 4K came out, so I was like, well, I got to get this. I was fascinated just what they did to make it look better. Like the process, like they went back to the film vaults, cleaned it up. And there was this one scene in the documentary. Well, I don't want to call it a documentary. It was more like behind the scenes look at how they were cleaning up the film. and you could see this shot between two frames where it didn't quite fit. You know, like it was going to overlap or something like that. But I mean, obviously, the naked eye, you'd never notice. But seeing it side by side, it was there. And they actually went out of their way to fix little things like that, to adjust it, to make sure the picture was primo quality, like you're going to get the best version of this film you could ever get.
That's one of the reasons I love movies so much. Movies are an art form, but they're also it's very commercial. There's huge money. They're compromised by financial interests, so it's not pure art, I would argue. But the craftsmanship that people, these craftsmen, these craftspeople that are employed in this industry, the artistry of that is brought to bear to make these movies is just insane, and it's worth celebrating and worth talking about. So
yeah,
that's one of the reasons I love movies so much. And
for
it's
sure.
like, you know, because in the past, craftspeople might have gone to work making cathedrals, or they might have gone to work making textiles, or all these different things that we don't do anymore. But we still make movies, and it's a refuge for all of these amazing craftspeople to do something cool. So,
and I think it's little things like that too, when you hear about people pirating movies, that people forget. They think of only the top tier, the studios. They don't think about that is who pirating movies is hurting. It's
That's a good point,
the people who actually craft these films, who actually give you everything that you want, that you never see, you never hear about. But their names are in the credits. You just don't pay attention.
yeah, you don't know what they mean when they...
Yeah. It's just like, oh, that Ted Green, he gripped something. Great. But it was important, trust me. Without Ted Green, who knows what would have happened.
Right on.
So, yeah, I'm with you. There's such a love to the craft, and when you can tell when there's true passion behind a project, because it filters into every aspect. If it's just an empty, dry husk of a movie, you feel that. It's like, they didn't care.
Yeah, and even if it is an empty, dry husk of a movie, there's still really cool people getting paid, or really talented people just doing stuff that makes the movie something that it, you know, otherwise wouldn't even be. Like, you could probably take the director off of it and the actors who didn't want to be there, but still the people below the line who are making the thing.
Right.
They're still doing something that's worth looking at, I guess. But
sure. Now, you were talking about movies that kind of put you into this pretentious mode. Take me through that element of your life.
Well, I mean, like I said, I was I don't even remember where I started being exposed to these movies, but these are the movies that I was buying myself. Like, getting VHSs. I was asking my mom, these are the movies I wanted for my birthday and for Christmas, and that I don't even remember how I was being exposed to them. Some of my friends were into. I honestly don't remember, but however it was, the movies that I was choosing to watch and the ones that I was choosing to be in love with, or that spoke to me somehow. And like I said, I don't really understand how they chose me. So here I am being pretentious, but let me just tell you the list.
Okay.
It's 15 long, or actually 16, and then we don't have to talk about all of them, but here's the list: Godfathers, Part 1 and 2, Taxi Driver, Aliens, Blade Runner, Akira, Last of the Mohicans, Heat, 12 Monkeys, Trainspotting, Out of Sight, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero, House of Flying Daggers, Lost in Translation, and Waking Life. I would say the first half of those would be that high school period that I mentioned earlier. Trainspotting, Out of Sight. Now we're getting into late high school, college, and then maybe Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon on. We're looking at college / post-college, early 20s. So, yeah, and there's kind of a range there. Like, there's some mobster movies, other, Scorsese, Coppola, and then there's sci-fi. Sci-fi was huge because I was into comics. X-Men was my favorite comic at that time, so sci-fi was big for me. And then I was super into I was into video games. I love video games too. So Akira and Blade Runner, those were just like mind-blowing, just in terms of visuals alone. Because I fancied myself an artist. So those were huge for me. But then like Last of the Mohicans, like what? I yeah. So I think that too. There's an element of melodrama that really speaks to me. Romanticism, getting caught up in these epic romances. Like another one that I didn't put on the list, but could maybe be there, but I haven't seen it very many times since, was Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. And you know, as a male high school, you wouldn't admit that you liked that movie at the time, but I loved that movie. I had it on VHS, but I wouldn't tell anybody that I had it. So yeah, I don't know. And 12 Monkeys, another sci-fi movie, but also in the correlation between Last of the Mohicans and 12 Monkeys was Madeline Stowe, who I was absolutely in love with. So yeah, there's another part of it. When you're talking about this late adolescence, there's also the actors and actresses themselves who, you know, just are part of that, your coming of age in a way. And I don't want to get creepy weird about it, but
no, it's true.
Yeah. And the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, going back to that Asian thing, of course now moving over to China, but there's this melodrama that I just really, really speaks to me. And then going on into Hero, House of Flying Daggers, those are very melodramatic. And then Lost in Translation and Waking Life, these are the kinds of movies that I more that identify with now more so. The kinds of movies that I gravitate towards are these very talky movies where it's conversational, not much happens in the way of plot. They're novelistic. I mean, I'd still watch everything, but the movies that I love the most, I think, are more like Lost in Translation and Waking Life than Blade Runner, for instance.
Right.
Like Blade Runner 2049 just totally, I bounced off that. As much as I appreciated it visually and, you know, the craft of it, you know, the movie just, I could have done without it.
Sure.
But anyway, so that's my formative list. Like I said, those are the movies that I started identifying with in high school and then college that I chose, that they somehow defined me and who I wanted to be, or the artist that I wanted to be. So,
I mean, you've got a solid list there. I mean, I'd probably have watched most of those films, and I would regard them as very solid films. So, I mean, I would say you've got a good solid list there.
Yeah, there's nothing adventurous about these. I mean, to me, they were adventurous, but they're not like outre in any way. They're very much movies that were released in the theaters. Most of them made a lot of money. You know, so I'm not like, I wanted to be an original person and I wanted to be kind of the interesting person, but there's, you know, these movies are, most of them are classics, if not slightly below the level of a classic.
So did you feel like that these movies were going to spit, like if to other filmmakers or other film buffs like you, it was like, look at my collection, see what I got?
Yeah.
Did you feel like it was going to like elevate your status or something to that?
Well, I don't know.
Degree?
If I had gone into film at this point in my life, maybe so, but I didn't. It took me another 20 years before I started thinking about making film a direction that I wanted to go in professionally. I wish I did. I wish I had gone to a film school back then. It didn't even occur to me that was even possible. But yeah, I mean, each of these has like different elements in terms of my personal relationships with other people. Like Out of Sight was something that I went and saw with a friend. I don't know. But a lot of these were just things that I don't even know. I remember, like Last of the Mohicans, I remember that being in the what those film magazines that were still being printed and sold in stores. I remember that coming out, like that was a big movie that was being hyped. And I remember hearing about it and reading about it. I remember like them talking about where it was being filmed, like in North Carolina or something, but also maybe in South America. I can't remember the particulars, but that was probably the first movie, aside from like Batman, where I was like paying attention to. It was coming out, and I probably watched it 20 times when I was, what year was that? That was 1993, 1992?
I think so,
Yeah, between the age of 12 and 15, 16, I probably watched it 50 times. But
see, a movie like that for me, I guess it would kind of be in that wheelhouse, because before a certain time, kind of like what you're talking about, there were just certain movies that you kind of felt like this is where you belong. Like this is the kind of movies you expect. So like we mentioned, Gremlins or Ghostbusters or something like that. Even Terminator to a degree. You know, T2 had just come out and that was a big action hit. That, you know, Predator and Alien and stuff like that. You have these sci-fi-esque, RoboCop. There's another one. Even though I probably shouldn't have watched that at the time.
Yeah.
But they do kind of gear it, even though it's R-rated, to a kid level. So you kind of feel like you're drawn to this fantasy of it all. But then something like Last of the Mohicans, like you said, it's a movie you're paying attention to at an age where you might not necessarily think that you should be, or most kids maybe aren't, but you are. So it's speaking to you on some level. The one that I can think of that probably did that for me would have been Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood. And there was just something about it. And I don't know why, you know, but I was paying attention. And this was not just, they were talking about real issues. And maybe at the time I didn't quite grasp all those issues like I do today. Like I really understand some of the underpinnings of it all, but I was paying attention. And he kind of put Clint Eastwood on my radar just a little bit to where I was like, okay, I kind of liking what this man's doing. It's not that he hasn't ever been there, but I'm paying attention now.
Something different about that movie. It was just so direct.
Yeah.
It wasn't Last of the Mohicans level of romanticism, and some of it's more like a music video than it is a movie. Unforgiven is just like this shootout. There's nothing romantic about this shootout. No. This is just people are getting shot and they're dying, and people are throwing up about it. And
yeah, it was.
I don't want any part of this anymore. This is not. There's nothing romantic about this.
Mm-hmm. But that also felt like an interesting take on it, because I'm sure there are cowboy movies from way back when, or westerns, where they did the retired gunslinger doesn't want to do it. But in this scenario, you're just kind of getting like, this dude is haunted, and he's just like, I don't want to do this. But then he's kind of back against the wall, desperate, like, okay, just this one time, we'll go back out, we'll just do this one thing, and we're done. And then
he's an anti-hero. Like he's a murderer. He might not want to be, but he is.
And when you think about it, he's hard to sympathize with, but you do, because when you find out every little thing he's done, you're like, God, man, like, how can you sympathize with this man? But you do, and it's I don't know, it's a fascinating movie.
Well, it is a fascinating movie, and that reminds me of The Searchers with John Wayne, who is also an anti-hero, but that movie is just so much more old Hollywood romanticized,
right?
Where he can say all these awful things about the Comanches and the Indians and just be a racist, awful piece of poop, but he's John Wayne.
Yeah.
Whereas The Unforgiven, it's just like, yes, we're stripping away all of that old Hollywood golden age stuff and telling you this is more. I mean, of course, it's made up.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not what gunfighting really was like, but this is just a different take on it. And stripping all that romanticism away, all the music away. I can't remember the music in that movie. I feel like it was much more tonal or something, like it was just like,
like a string guitar just plucking away at it. I'm trying to think of any other movies that I had. Like, I know I did have a pretentious period. I know that for a fact, because there was I'd say it was in my 20s, and I know exactly when it happened. Kind of came into a group of film buffs, and of course they were probably more the pretentious ones than I was. I just wanted to be cool. I wanted to be. It's like, well, they're watching these cool movies. They're watching. Look at this guy. He's got Kubrick all over on his shelf. I got to watch these movies, so I'm watching The Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, and I had seen The Shining prior.
Yeah, those. Stanley Kubrick was. I could have easily put both those two movies they're on my notes as my sub movies, but they easily could have been right there.
Yeah,
Clockwork Orange and Full Metal Jacket specifically.
But I felt like I had to watch these movies. I felt like this is where because if I wanted to be a filmmaker, if I wanted to do this, I got to know how I have to do this. And there was even, I remember this one very specifically, it was one of those I had to pull from, because I know I watched a lot of them, but this one is one that stood out for me, is I was in this period where it's like, if I need to understand indie filmmakers, I got to watch indie films. I got to watch every one of them I can find. The one that stands out to me that I sought out because it was like, this is real indie stuff. Coffee and Cigarettes from Jim Jarmusch. And I was like, I got to watch this because this is indie. This is as indie as it gets. And I'll figure this is how it's done. And I don't think I quite understood why I felt that way or why that is. I just thought watching this makes me cool, and I know about indie filmmaking now because I've watched this movie. Yeah. But I still don't think I understood quite the connection.
That's part of the filmmaker's education. If you fancy yourself or you want to be a filmmaker, there are the films that you feel like you have to watch, even if they're not the ones that you would want to watch or that necessarily speak to you, but they're like on the list. They're on the curriculum, so to speak. Yeah. And also depending on what kind of filmmaker you want to be.
Sure.
Some may not be there, but it's understandable.
No, I definitely had a wide swath. Eraserhead was another one on that list, and whew, that is a watch, man. I'll give it credit. I mean, Lynch was doing something wild, and I have watched it more than once. I guess because I'm still trying to understand what I'm watching. Mm-hmm. But it's a watch. It's something. It's out there.
Yeah, and you don't have to pretend to like David Lynch. Just because everybody, or certain subset of people are like, well, this guy's a genius. Maybe he is, but it's not like he makes enjoyable movies. Or, they're more like Thomas Pynchon novels. It's like, people want to say they read the novel, but did they really read them?
Right. Like, in all honesty, I mean, kind of on a similar level as David Cronenberg, The Fly is like the one movie of his that I truly love. Yeah. And some of his other stuff I've been hit or miss on. Yeah. Some, like, I can get where someone likes Videodrome. It's just not for me. It's just not for me. So, yeah, I appreciate and I can respect a lot of these filmmakers' work and what they do. But probably like you, I've gotten to a place where I appreciate movies in kind of a different way. If I watch something and I never think about it again, no matter what it was, it's probably a reason for that. Yeah. If I forgot it the moment it was over, then it wasn't for me. But if I can remember, if I hang on to it, there's something calling me back that I need to watch again or I need to see again, and I'm going to do that. So I try to keep that in the back of my head. Do I want to watch this again? Is there something about it that makes me think or feel or creative in some way that I'm just like, gosh, there's so much about it. And it's why I continue to return to a lot of these older movies because there's something about them that I'm just like, this is such a good movie. In fact, I don't know if you've ever done this, but was there ever a moment where you rewatched an older movie that you watched several times, but possibly did not watch as thoroughly as you ever thought you did? And then you had this realization that you were really watching it for the first time super thoroughly. And then you realize, damn, this is a really good movie. Like you knew it was a good movie, but like certain things are just seeping in just the right way, and you're like, God, this is so good.
I don't know. I'm sure that's happened. I cannot think of a movie right now that I watched that way. But when you were talking about the movie, like the list that I gave, like these were the movies that I watched and rewatched over and over and over again. But it's they might not be the movies that I would do that now. Because especially as a kid, as a high schooler, and back when we were kids, this was pre-internet, like we didn't have the whole world at our fingertips. We only had, we had to going out and searching for new things took some effort. Yeah. And, you were, I don't know, your tastes were only as broad as maybe the town you grew up in.
Right.
It was very different. So at one level, like I'm kind of embarrassed by the movies, even though these are all objectively good movies.
Mm-hmm.
But you do your best, I suppose, with what you have. But to your question, I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of an example of a movie that I liked, but then went back and watched and was like, oh yeah, I love this movie now.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is something.
I mean, it may not be something that just comes to mind, but I know I've had that realization once or twice where I was like, why did it take now for me to realize this is a good movie?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I knew it was a good movie, but something just clicked. Like, this is the third, fourth, fifth viewing, whatever it was. Something in that moment just snapped. It clicked. Like, I was so focused on it for the first time ever. And boom, it became...
Do you have one in mind like that, or...
It may be an odd choice, but this was just something that kind of... I kind of used it as my tent pole, the one to remember it, because this was one I know for a fact that I did this with, and it was Predator.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the original one. I had gotten it, like there was a special edition version of it, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna watch this. And there's nobody bothering me, no one in the house, so I kind of had it just to myself. And I guess I was just super focused.
Mm-hmm.
And there were just elements that I hadn't seen before, or maybe had not quite paid attention to the story, or to this or to that, and just little elements. And by the time it was all over, I was like, have I not watched this movie before?
It's almost like a level of expectation with something like Predator. You're thinking it's probably more of a, it's just it's a big budget action. It's a Schwarzenegger film. So you're not maybe thinking about it on a deeper level.
Yeah.
But again, we were talking about like this level of craftsmanship in movies that even these supposedly just popcorn movies, there's oftentimes something beneath it. There's deeper layers to it. Mm-hmm. There's a podcast that I watch. It's called the Rewatchables, and they go back and watch the kinds of movies that will be on cable randomly, and you just get sucked into watching it the 10th time. And recently they did feature Predator, and just listening, because that was a not a favorite movie of mine, but it's right up my wheelhouse, and I
Sure.
I did like that movie, but I'm interested to go back and watch it again to just to your point. Maybe I'm going to love this movie now because I'm going to consider it in a new way, whereas before I might have thought of it as just kind of a standard 80s action movie, sci-fi action movie, but there's probably a lot more going on there.
Yeah. I mean, even going back to Jaws, that was another one that at some point things clicked. It wasn't just a shark movie, it was something more.
And I think, this might be a topic for another podcast, but I feel like this kind of stuff doesn't happen with popcorn movies anymore. Now they are just popcorn movies. There's very little that's not focus tested, written by committee. There's very little that's singular, that is somebody with something to say when we're talking about, like the Predator remake, for instance, that came out a couple years ago.
Sure.
It's a garbage movie. Whereas the original Predator, even though it was, a popcorn movie, there was still stuff there that people wanted to get across, or that was a little bit deeper, a little bit more subtextual, which is something that movies should have. Mm-hmm. That's more interesting than just what's on the screen.
Yeah.
Then we don't get, not that there's not good movies made anymore, but when we're looking at the level of the big budget, and now it's like IP as opposed to just a movie that somebody wants to make.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So do you have anything else you want to talk about with your film list that you want to elaborate on, or?
Well, now that you put me on the spot. Yeah, I feel like I've just the whole point of the conversation was just to talk about, the movies that, or at least for me, were the movies that were formative to my identity, formative to who I wanted to be, and we don't have to get into like the weeds of the Godfathers versus Last of the Mohicans, and like I said, I feel like I kind of touched on it when it's just like when you're coming of age in a certain time, you're doing your best to create the person that you want to be, but you only have access to so much.
Yeah.
And you could have been somebody completely different if you had a different set of friends, if you grew up in a different town. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs, and it was just, I don't know. This is what I had. This is the best that I could do.
Right.
And I don't know.
I mean, even you being from the suburbs, I mean, I grew up in the country, but we have a lot of similar tastes. It's interesting how that works, because you talk about video games and comics and things like that. That was my escape. That's where I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
But there may have been differences when it came to our social interactions, you know. So, but we also seem like we're on the same page when it comes to movies. I mean, I'm sure there's...
Yeah, I feel like we diverge in
yeah.
particular genres and, you know, going down certain rabbit holes, but that's, you know, that's cool. I don't mind that at all.
And that's why we have to spread this out onto other podcasts, because then you'll come back and you'll want to hear, okay, well, where's he going? Where's he going? Because I want to know, but I'm not going to talk about it right now. So, all right, how about we wrap it up? Everybody that's been listening, thank you for kind of coming on this journey with us as we talk about movies. We're trying to find our footing, so bear with us. We'll get our rhythm, and then sooner or later it'll just be we'll be off to the races. But wherever you're listening to this now, hopefully we'll get ourselves a nice proper space at some point, and then you can just follow along. We'll get all the details hammered out later on with socials and whatever if we get to that point. But for now, thank you for listening. I'm Stephen White.
And I'm Philip Peck.
And we'll see you next time.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.